If someone told you that the mountain you were going to hike at was called Dead Mountain, would you go? Well, 9 experienced Soviet hikers certainly did. They set out for the Ural Mountains in February 1959, and they never came back. When rescuers found their tent, it had been slashed open from the inside. Their belongings were scattered. Footprints in the snow led downhill, some barefoot, some of them even in just socks, and all of this in negative 30 degrees Celsius cold. Their bodies were found weeks apart. Some had injuries consistent with car crashes. One was missing her eyes and tongue. Some had traces of radiation on their clothes. And just to put it into perspective, the Ural Mountains were nowhere near a road. No, this isn't a fantasy novel. This is a Dyatlov Pass Incident. And in 65 years, we still don't know what happened. So February 1959, the height of the Cold War. The Soviet Union is locked in an ideological battle with the West, and secrecy is the default setting for anything unusual. A group of 9 hikers, 8 students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, and 1 instructor set out on a ski trek through the northern Ural Mountains. Their destination? Otorten Mountain. The trip was rated a Category 3 difficulty, the second highest level for Soviet expeditions. But these weren't amateurs, they were all experienced, all seasoned in winter trekking. Their leader was the 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov. He was strong, methodical, the kind of person that you would trust to lead you through such hostile terrain. And on January 27th, they began their journey. One member, Yuri Yudin, turned back early due to illness. That decision saved his life. The remaining 9 continued north. On February 1st, they pitched their tent on the eastern slope of hallucinations. In the Mansi language, the indigenous people of the region, hallucinations means dead mountain. And they never made it off. When the group failed to return by their expected date, families began to worry. The search for them began on February 20th, and what rescuers found defied all explanation. The tent was found still standing, but had been cut open from the inside. It wasn't torn by the wind, not ripped by an animal. It had deliberately been slashed by the people inside, as if they were desperate to escape something from within. Their belongings were still there. Warm clothes, boots, supplies, everything that they would have needed to stand a reasonable chance of surviving in sub-zero temperatures. And yet they left it behind. Footprints led away from the tent down the slope. There was about 8 or 9 sets, and some were found barefoot, and like I said earlier, some were just with socks. And keep in mind, this time of year on this mountain at night, the temperatures were cold enough to kill in minutes. But these footprints, they didn't show any signs of panic. They were relatively evenly paced, suggesting that the hikers had been walking, fast walking at most, but definitely not running. They were heading away from shelter into the frozen wilderness and inadequately dressed. But why? So the rescuers followed, and that's when the bodies started appearing. February 26th. Searchers found the first 2 bodies near a cedar tree about a mile from the tent. Yuri Dashenko and Yuri Krivanashko, they were dressed only in underwear. There were signs they tried to build a fire. Branches broken off the cedar tree, burns on their hands, but both had unfortunately died of hypothermia. The next day, 3 more bodies were found on the slope between cedar and the tent. Igor Dyatlov, Zenaida Kolomograva, and Rostom Slobodin. Their positions suggested they'd been trying to return to the tent, but hadn't made it. Hypothermia had claimed them as well. And then came May. The snow melted, and searchers found the last 4 bodies in a ravine about 250 feet from that cedar tree. And this is where the incident goes from tragic to the fantastical. One of the hikers was found with her eyes and tongue missing. Another, Semyon Zolotrov, had a massive chest trauma. His ribs were fractured with such force that it was compared to a car crash. And then there was Nikolai, who had fractured skull. and then the last one also had severe injuries as well. But here's the weird part. These weren't from external wounds, like no cuts or bruises that would indicate a fight. However, the medical examiner noted that the force required to cause these injuries would have been impossible for a human to deliver without leaving marks. One doctor described the trauma as equivalent to being hit by a car at high speed. So some of these bodies were wearing clothes taken from those who had died earlier. One had a piece of Dibana's clothing wrapped around the foot that they'd scavenged from the dead to survive. And then there were the anomalies. Some of the clothing tested positive for radiation. Some of the bodies had an orange tint to their skin, and others had prematurely grayed hair. Hair that hadn't been prematurely grayed before they'd left, at least not noticed by the family. So the Soviet authorities investigated, and they classified the files. Their conclusion? A compelling natural force caused the deaths. That's it. Nothing specific, just a force. Yuri Yudin, the sole survivor who turned back, has spent the rest of his life haunted by what happened to his friends, and has even said, if he had a chance to ask God just one question, it would be, what really happened to my friends that night? He died in 2013 without ever getting an answer. So, what are the theories? We do have the avalanche theory, which is the most recent scientific explanation. In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the case, and by 2021, a joint Russian-Swiss study concluded that a delayed slab avalanche, triggered by the wind and the specific placement of the tent, caused the group to panic and flee. The avalanche could have caused even the severe chest and skull injuries. But this theory isn't not without its problems. You see, the tent poles were still upright when the rescuers arrived. There was no debris or snow buildup consistent with an avalanche, and the slope angle was relatively low. And if they had time to walk away instead of run, why wouldn't they put their clothes on? The next theory gets a little wilder. You have the katabatic wind, or the infrasound theory. And that suggests that powerful winds unique to the mountain environments, possibly even what gave its name as Dead Mountain, created low-frequency sounds that induced panic and disorientation. Infrasound can cause feelings of dread, anxiety, and even hallucinations. Maybe the hikers fled the tent in a state of terror caused by something they hadn't consciously perceived. And that's plausible, but sound doesn't explain severe injuries, radiation, or missing eye and tongue. So, military involvement is our next theory, and it's one of the darker theories. You see, the northern Urals were near Soviet military testing sites, and there were reports of fireballs in the sky around the time of the incident. A searcher named Vladimir Askenadazi, now in his late 80s, has publicly appealed for witnesses to come forward about these fireballs, asking, where did the fireballs come from? Is only half the problem. How did the hikers get such injuries? Could the group have stumbled into a secret rocket test? Maybe. Could there have been a cover-up? Radiation traces, classified files, vague official conclusions as a force? That's suspicious. But again, there's no concrete proof. Finally, we have my favorite, the supernatural and conspiracy theories. So, there's plenty of them. Yeti attacks, UFO encounters given the fireball sightings, and attacks by Mansi tribesmen angered by intruders on their sacred mountain. Now, all have been largely debunked, but they persist still popularly. And the missing eyes and tongue, by the way, are probably likely explained by scavenging animals. Soft tissue is usually the first to be consumed in post-mortem. And then there's internal conflict or paradoxical undressing. That's also been suggested and could account, right? So a paradoxical undressing is also a known phenomenon where hypothermia victims in the final stages before death feel so intensely hot they remove their clothing. But that wouldn't explain why they left the tent in the first place to get to that place. And it doesn't explain the catastrophic injuries. Every theory has gaps, every explanation has unanswered questions. However, this one is indeed a puzzle where not many pieces fit, at least not neatly together. So, I'll leave that to you. If this story interests you, Hit that like button and subscribe for more of these fantastical tales where reality defies explanation. Share this with someone who loves unsolved mysteries, who likes looking into past incidences for their fantasy, inspiration, and wonders what really lurks in the dark corners of the world. And if you love fantasy and you want more, check out my books at isaacyorks.com, where I explore that thin line between real and impossible. Or sign up for my mailing list to receive a new short story and bookish updates every month. Thanks for watching, keep questioning, keep wondering, and remember, the truth is always weirder than fantasy.